Hello folks, Nick Fairburn here. I want to talk about fast shooting guns. Had a recent decision from the Supreme Court that said bump stocks are not illegal, that they do not convert a semi-auto into a full auto machine gun. So that's a win in a way for the Second Amendment. But I want to talk about some of these fast shooters and whether or not they're all that great an idea. If you want to hear what I have to say, stay tuned. Okay, very recently now, Supreme Court just said bump stocks are not illegal. They do not convert a semi-auto into a full auto machine gun. I think that's the correct interpretation. If you go by the strict language of the National Firearms Act, one function of the trigger gets you one shot. That's what a bump stock does. Supreme Court Justice Alito said in his concurrence that Congress could legislate away bump stocks if they changed the language of the statute. So we're splitting some hairs here. But it kind of kicks up something that I've thought about for a lot of years. Is it really worth all that we do with these fast shooting devices, even full auto machine guns? Are they worth the trouble? Well, you got to ask yourself, what do you gain with a bump stock? Now, I only played with one once. A friend of mine had one. And at first, I couldn't get the darn thing to work. You kind of have to develop a technique of shooting it rather loosely to let that thing bump around just right to get the full auto effect. But there's other ways to do it. What about a forced reset trigger? Basically just a heavier trigger pull. It's got a heavier spring to reset the trigger more quickly so that you can get on it more quickly. And again, if you shoot it kind of loosely and let that recoil bounce things around, you get the same effect. You don't even have to buy a bump stock. What about a binary trigger? That's where you get one shot when you pull the trigger and a second shot when you release the trigger. Is that one function of the trigger, or is it really two? From my point of view, and I've said several times, to me guns are tools, not toys. What the forced reset, the binary triggers, the bump stocks, what they really are good at is turning ammunition into a pile of empty brass very rapidly. And as long as we remain a free country, spending your money to rapidly turn ammo into brass is okay, if that's what you want to do. Now, does that mean these things should be illegal? No, I don't necessarily think they should be. It certainly does not convert a semi-auto into a machine gun. Is it a practical, offensive, or defensive tool? No, I don't think so. Now, there's plenty of videos of guys, getting one of these rapid fire effects and doing a magazine dump. A couple I've seen on an indoor range, they've got a target down there maybe 7 or 10 yards, and they reel it back when they're done, and they got a pretty nice group in the middle of it at 7 to 10 yards. Up close, they can be pretty effective. But if your goal is to put down one or more bad guys who are your adversaries, full auto has never been very effective. I think it's just mostly the thrill of firing a full auto weapon, and they're fun. There are other ways to get rapid semi-auto fire. I mentioned the binary trigger, the forced reset trigger, the bump stock. Plenty of videos. Go look them up on YouTube all you want. You can put your thumb in a belt loop and get that kind of loose triggering effect. Some guys put a rubber band around the back of the trigger, which is really no more than a forced reset system. There were, I'm not sure if you can still find them on the market, but there were little crank devices you could clamp onto the trigger guard and turn it like a Gatling gun. Just works the trigger really, really fast. And there's even one now I see advertised on the internet that's sort of a Gatling gun in the pistol grip of an AR-15. You can pop out a little handle, and this handle has a mechanism that goes up through into the receiver and actually activates the trigger. So you can crank this thing like a Gatling gun and make it shoot really fast. Now, those things are all kind of cool, especially if somebody else is paying for the ammo. But that cool group you're going to shoot up close, I think, is going to become a really, really large group pretty quickly as you go downrange. And after all, the whole point to a rifle is to be able to make precise hits. In the case of an AR-15, close to mid-range targets at the very least. Make no mistake, fully automatic weapons are a hell of a lot of fun. Not too long ago, I posted a video of me firing a Gatling gun at the Cody Firearms Experience in Cody, Wyoming. A buddy and I were out there on an elk hunt. It cost me $75 to fire 40 rounds, crank them through this Gatling gun. Why? Because I'd never fired a Gatling gun. They're cool. There are many ranges across the United States where you can rent a full auto weapon. When I was a young cop here in Illinois, we mostly all shot 38s or 357 revolvers. The universal training ammo was 38 wad cutters, very light loaded powder puff kind of ammunition. There was a company near Ottawa, Illinois called Buffalo Rock Shooter Supply. It's been out of business for years and years. And their primary business was cranking out these 38 wad cutter loads for police training by the millions. They also had in their store where you could buy 38 wad cutter reloads, and they reloaded a lot of other kinds of ammunition as well. They had a whole wall covered with fully automatic weapons. They were a Class 3 dealer. And in order to use one of those weapons, go out on their outdoor range and shoot it, all you had to do was buy the ammo from them. So a couple of times a year, several of us young cops would drive up to Buffalo Rock Shooter Supply and drop, I don't know, back then maybe 50 or 75 bucks, which was a lot of money back then. But we shot almost all the automatic weapons there were to shoot. They had MP40, the Schmeiser 9mm submachine guns. They had Thompsons. They had BARs. They had a Lewis machine gun, big disc-loaded 30-06, air-cooled. They were mounted on airplanes and a lot of other things. We went up there and shot most of the full automatic weapons you've read about or heard about or seen in war movies over the years. It was cool. I have never seen anybody fire a full automatic weapon when they didn't turn around with a just huge smile on their face. It's cool. The liberal TV commentator Rachel Maddow, I saw her on one of the nighttime talk shows, and they were talking about guns, and she hates guns. She doesn't think anybody should be allowed to own a gun. But she thinks you should be able to go to one of those ranges and rent a gun and shoot it inside the range. She bats for the other team, and she told the story that, a couple of her new girlfriends, she took them to the range and let them fire full automatic weapons, and because it was so much fun. It is, no doubt about it. Let's go a step beyond the bump stocks and the binary triggers and things like that. What about all the Glock switches we keep hearing about? Fully automatic conversion units that mount on the back of a Glock and let you just mag dump in a matter of a second or two. They're illegal. No two ways about it. 30 years ago, somebody had figured out how to make an auto sear that would drop into an AR-15. Now you had to have a different selector, and you had to have a different bolt carrier, but when you did that, in combination with this auto sear, you had a select fire M16 that used to be an AR-15. They were illegal. ATF ruled that if you were in possession of the auto sear and the necessary parts to convert it, even if they were just laying in a box, you were in possession of a machine gun, and therefore you're going to be charged. There is a Glock 18, and I've had the opportunity to fire one. So, if 17 was the first model of Glock we saw on the market, then apparently 18 was the first variation of that, and that is a 17 with a switch. You flip the little switch on the slide, it goes full auto. And I mean, it goes full auto. You will dump a 32-round magazine out of a Glock in a little bit under about a second and a half. It is extremely high cyclic rate, and it just spits out brass like you can't believe. When I was with the sheriff's office in Wyoming, our captain on the sheriff's office was retired from the Cook County Sheriff's Police up in northern Illinois. He was also a HUMINT counter-intel guy in the Army Reserve, and let's just say he had some connections. He had a Class 3 dealer's license, and that allowed him to have dealers' samples of fully automatic weapons. He didn't technically own them, the company owned them, and if he gave up the Class 3 license, then he had to get rid of them, because Illinois was one of the states where you could not legally possess a fully automatic weapon. I think there are 8 states where you cannot. In the rest of the, so over 40 of the states in the union, you can have a fully automatic weapon if you want to pay the price, go through the background check, get it registered to you, and pay the $200 federal tax stamp. He had, I would guess, because we had him locked up in the evidence room of our sheriff's office for safekeeping, I would guess he had about 50 different fully automatic weapons as dealer samples. One of them was a Beretta 93R. That's a little bit bigger copy of the Beretta 92 9mm pistol. I'll put a picture up of it. It has a foregrip that you can fold down to really get a good grip on it. Your pistol grip is here. It has a little shoulder stock that mounts on there. So its cyclic rate, like the Glock pistol, is extremely fast. This thing is running at about 1,000 to 1,200 rounds per minute. And in fact, the Beretta 93 is so fast, it didn't fire full auto. It fired either semi-auto or 3-round burst. So you pull the trigger, you're going to get 3. You don't even hear 3 shots. It's kind of like a long shot, like a boom, and you got 3. Now, up close, 7 yards or so, you could pop this sucker between targets and put a nice 3-shot group in the center of them very easily. But if you were even 15 yards back, you kind of had to hold the sights down in the crotch of the silhouette target, and those 3 rounds were going to stitch their way up through the middle of it. It was that difficult to keep control of. Fun to shoot, but not really very practical, because by the time you get the foregrip and the shoulder stock, you might as well have an MP5 submachine gun, which is infinitely more controllable than this little pistol going crazy on you. So from a practical point of view, the machine pistols, like the Glock, like the Beretta 93R, are not all that practical. Now, I understand the gangbangers are putting these switches on them, and we're hearing about, fully automatic Glocks with a switch all over the country. Realistically, they're dumping a lot of ammo, but I got a feeling they're probably not hitting that much more than they would with just a semi-auto and actually trying to aim the thing and pull the trigger. Because that's the thing I learned very early on, that handheld automatic weapons fire is loud, it's kind of startling, frightening when people hear it, and it is amazingly ineffective. So now, this is where you can go ahead and say, oh, this guy's full of crap, I can write my name with a Thompson submachine gun, at 25 yards. Okay, I've heard those stories too. And I've got a fair amount of trigger time on Thompson submachine guns and Schmeisers and Uzis. And while they can be very effective when you get the hang of them and put enough rounds through to build your skills up, yeah, the average person picking one up, you're safer if they have an Uzi than if they have a shotgun, because chances are the Uzi's going to miss you with virtually all the rounds. That shotgun's going to put some pellets in your butt. So that's the thing that I'm scared of. At one time, there were a couple of us that had M16s on a range, and a fair amount of ammunition available that day. And as a joke, somebody threw a pop can out towards the backstop, and a couple different guys, just from the hip, well, I'll show you what I can do. They emptied a 30-round magazine from an M16 at a pop can about 10 yards away. They threw up a hell of a cloud of dust. They bounced the pop can all over, but they didn't put a hole in it. So to kind of prove my point, I just drew a quick sight picture, tapped the trigger, and put a hole in it with 1 round. So what really is firepower? Jeff Cooper, one of his quotes, was something to the effect that firepower is often just more misses per minute. When I was at Gunsight for a 250 class, I remember on a break sometime, the M249 SAW was just coming into Army use, 5.56 belt-fed squad automatic weapon. And I think everybody there knew he didn't consider the M16 to be a real man's rifle. He called the 5.56 round a poodle shooter. But somebody asked him, "Hey, what do you think of this new SAW unit that the rifle squads are going to have in the Army?" And he turned around with a kind of a funny look on his face, and Cooper said, "What could be better than a belt-fed varmint rifle?" If you really need to do serious work with a fully automatic weapon, you really need a belt to feed it, because you need a lot of ammo available. So the whole bump stock thing came about because of active shooter in Las Vegas a few years ago had several AR-style rifles in the hotel. And he was firing down into this country and western concert about 400 or 500 yards away. He had really the only kind of situation where something like a bump stock or a full auto M16 would really be effective. Very rare situation. Now, as I said, you can own a full auto in most states. You got to do an ATF background check. It is registered. You got to pay a $200 tax stamp every time that weapon changes hands. In 1986, a law was passed that locked down the transferable fully automatic weapons in the U.S. system. So no more new weapons go into that system. So you got a finite supply, and now the prices of those things have kind of exploded. At one time, you could buy a decent 9mm submachine gun for a few $100. Now you're probably looking at a few thousand and up. And some of the officers I worked with in Wyoming had their own subguns. 9mm subguns were pretty popular back in the 80s. And I had even looked at buying one. I didn't want to buy a rifle caliber because it was going to be too expensive to feed. A neighbor of mine, he lived down the hill from where I lived out in the country. Oil field worker that made a lot of money, wasn't married, didn't have kids, and his hobby was machine guns. And he had several machine guns, perfectly legal, fully registered to him. He had M16s, he had submachine guns. He had an M60 machine gun. And I remember one time just bumped into him and I said, "Hey, I hear you got an M60. I said, "I suppose I'll hear that firing down over the hill one of these days." "Yeah," he said, "it's really cool." And he goes, "I found a bunch of ammo real cheap." He said, "I got a couple of those aerial fire cans." Now that's, guys that know ammo cans know there's the 30 size, the 50 size. The big 20mm size in the Army is what they call an aerial fire can. It will hold 1,500 rounds of 7.62 ammo linked up for an M60 or the newer versions. Every fifth round is a tracer. Here's 1,500 rounds linked together. It's like one big magazine. He said, "Yeah, I bought a couple cans of those." He said, "I'm saving one back." He said, "If you guys ever get in a bind, you sheriff's deputies, if you ever get in a real bind out there, you give me a call and I'll bring that M60 in one of those big cans and I'll help you out." And I know this guy, he was just laying there in bed at night thinking, "Boy, I hope they call me tonight." This was his dream, to go take that M60 out and put it in some kind of a real event sometime. I knew some cops in Rock Springs, Wyoming. And one of their officers had pulled a traffic stop in a residential, I guess pretty nice neighborhood, residential area there. And during the traffic stop, the driver of the suspect car got out. They got into an altercation with the officer, and he was able to disarm that officer. As I heard the story, the police officer was kind of running around his squad car trying to use it as cover as this guy popped off a couple of rounds from the officer's weapon trying to shoot him. When a neighbor down the street ran up behind the bad guy with a perfectly legal, fully registered Uzi and did a magazine dump into this guy's back at about 3 or 4 yards. That's the only legal, full automatic weapon good guy story I've ever heard. By the same token, having those fully registered automatic weapons used in a crime is almost unheard of. I don't think I'm aware of one at all. The people who own those, who jump through all the hoops to get those, are pretty law-abiding people. My captain on the sheriff's office, one of the very unusual full autos he had, it was an FN FAL, so the 50s and 60s vintage 7.62 weapon. This one was a bigger size. It was intended kind of as a replacement for the BAR. And I looked it up. I think it was an L1A2 British variation. It even had a pintle mount, so you could put it on like a tripod. And he had a 22 conversion unit for this thing. It had about a 10-inch barrel that slid down the bore, different magazines, and so he would go down prone on this big heavy bipod, and he had about a 30-round 22 long rifle magazine for this thing, and it was really neat and really cool. We'd go out shooting prairie dogs, and I'd go out with my bolt action 223, and I'd try to make sniper grade shots out of 200 or 300 yards off a bipod. And this guy's over there just giggling to himself, you know, spraying 22 long rifles out there, you know, by the boxfuls. His idea of fun was to chase that prairie dog back and forth with that full auto 22, and he might have hit 1 or 2 a day. My goal was to go out and tip over a whole bunch of them to help the rancher so they weren't eating his grass and putting holes in his pasture, and get some good rifle training. But to me, that illustrates the difference between full auto and not full auto toy as opposed to a tool. So here's where I'll get to my talk about fast shooters and probably alienate some of my viewers and get a lot of bad comments. If you want to play with fast shooters, go for it. Save up your money, shoot all you want. If you want to own one in a state where it's legal, God bless you, go do it. If you want to go rent one at a range and turn around with a big smile on your face, I've done it too. I love it. But when we try to create these wannabe fast shooters with bump stocks and, you know, forced resets and binary triggers and hooking your thumb in your belt loop and wrapping a rubber band and all that kind of stuff, it may be pretty cool and may be a lot of fun. But it reinforces the anti-gunners' bad ideas about those of us who own guns. It isn't illegal. It isn't wrong. I don't think that you should be ashamed of doing it or anything like that. But just stop and think. Is it making our cause look better or worse? Larry Vickers, former Delta operator, very well known as a very practical firearms trainer around the country. Millions and millions of views on his YouTube videos. He got himself in one hell of a legal bind over automatic weapons. He had a Class 3 dealer's license, and he used that with letters from some law enforcement officials to import very rare, very unusual full auto dealer samples. Just to have in his collection, I guess. That the fascination with automatic weapons has cost him. I know a couple of other cops who lost their jobs, who got convictions because they just wanted a full auto so bad in a state where they couldn't legally own one that they dummied one up, or one guy got an auto sear and all the parts he needed. And is it really worth that much trouble just to go rat-a-tat-tat and put a big smile on your face? There are plenty of places where you can go do that legally. So if you really need to go cut loose with a full auto, and everybody should at least a few times in their life, it's that much fun, go to the range and rent one. I want to shoot an M134 minigun at least once in my life. Why? Because I haven't done that, and because it'd be one of the coolest things I could ever do. But I don't want to own one, and I sure as hell don't want to feed one. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with bump stocks. They are now legal again. It remains to be seen if Congress will be able to pull the votes together to try to make them illegal again. And if they do, that new law may not stand up to the Supreme Court test under the Bruin rules. So I'm not quite sure how to sum this up. There are lots of legal ways to shoot full automatic weapons if you want to. A bump stock is not, by Supreme Court definition, it is not a machine gun. So it is not against the law. The anti-gunners despise us. They don't want us to have any guns at all, and they sure as hell don't want us to have fast shooters. Most of them don't even realize that you can own a machine gun in most U.S. states, so long as it's registered and titled and you pay the tax stamp. So let me see if I can summarize this without offending too many people. The average gun hater doesn't even realize that you can legally have such things. They were thrilled when Bump Stocks got banned by ATF after the shooting in Las Vegas. They are going crazy now that the Supreme Court has said, sorry, under the statutory language, they're not illegal. So now bump stocks are going to be back on the market. The forced reset triggers, the binary triggers, are still in limbo. I think the ATF has essentially made them illegal, but chances are those rules are going to fall as well because of what happened with the bump stocks. So if you don't own a legal fully automatic weapon, you can certainly make one shoot really fast with a bump stock, with one of the triggers, with a simple rubber band around the back of a trigger on an AR, hooking your thumb in a belt loop, holding this thing loosely and letting the vibrations of the recoil cause it to shoot really fast. Okay, you can do that. You can have fun. You can turn a lot of ammo into a lot of brass. And you don't need to make it effective at a longer distance in order for it to be proper. My tools rather than toys rule is my rule for me. But if you want to have a toy to go out and play with like that, you're perfectly legal. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying when you post it on TikTok or you post it on YouTube and you show other people how to do it, you're not furthering our cause of protecting the Second Amendment. The people who want to ban guns want to ban all guns except their own, or the ones that their bodyguards have to protect them. And we are never very far away from having them win. Right now we have the Supreme Court on our side. But they hate that so much, they may try to destroy the Supreme Court to make this happen. And if we lose a couple of votes on the Supreme Court, we could lose all of our guns. So I don't know how to say this without pissing some of you off. But if you're going to have these toys and you want to play with them, kind of do it privately. Don't rub their nose in the fact that you know how to make these things shoot really fast. It's not illegal. It's a lot of fun. But it doesn't help our cause. So I just say, be cool with the fast shooters. Do them in private. Do them among your friends. This country is sitting on a powder keg. My last 3 videos, which have been very widely received, and you know the comments are way over 90% agreeing with me. This country's on the verge of civil war. This country could be on the verge of World War III with other international players coming into this mix. We're going to need all the weapons we can get our hands on if any of these things come true. So let's kind of stay low profile. Let's keep things as legal as we can. And let's be prepared. And should we ever get to the point where we have to, you know, shoot the Russian paratroopers out of the sky as they jump in like Red Dawn, leave your fast shooters at home. Bring a rifle that'll make every round count. Because if that ever happens, that's not the time to play. That's when we need some serious shooters. Hope I haven't offended you too badly. Thank you. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah. That's all there is till next time.